The reception hall inside the Capitol looked harmless enough: soft lighting, polished marble floors, small clusters of staffers laughing nervously over sparkling water. But the tension in the air was unmistakable. Everyone knew why they were really there. A closed-door bipartisan briefing was about to begin, and the room was filled with the children and aides of lawmakers who insisted on being involved. Senator John Neely Kennedy entered quietly, a folder tucked under his arm, nodding politely at the handful of people who greeted him. He wasn't there to socialize. He was there because he had been asked to help mediate a sensitive economic issue, something he'd done 100 times before, with calm, sharp logic and a little Louisiana charm. But tonight, someone else had plans for him. She walked in like she owned the place. Lila Harrington, the outspoken, notoriously entitled daughter of a high-profile Democratic senator. Everyone in Washington knew her reputation: fiery temper, oversized ego, and a habit of treating political spaces like her personal stage. She spotted Kennedy instantly. Her lips curled into a smirk. "There he is," she said loudly, making sure half the room heard her. Senator Folksy himself. A few staffers looked down at their shoes. They recognized the tone. Trouble incoming. Kennedy turned slowly, calm as still water. "Evenin', ma'am," he said politely. But Lila stepped closer, folding her arms. "You know, Senator, it's honestly shocking that people still take you seriously. All those one-liners, all that country boy act. It's getting old. Maybe it's time you retire before you embarrass yourself again." A couple of aides gasped under their breath. Lila wasn't done. "My father says you're holding this country back," she continued. "And frankly, I agree." Kennedy blinked once, twice. Not offended, calculating. He tilted his head, that familiar half-smile forming, the one he only used right before delivering a verbal knockout. "Well," he said softly, "that's quite a mouthful, sweetheart. You must be real proud of yourself." Lila stiffened. Kennedy stepped forward just an inch, just enough for her to realize she'd picked the wrong man to spar with. "Now," he continued, voice steady as steel, "if you're fixin' to insult me, you might want to pace yourself. I'd hate to see you run out of material before the adults start talkin'. A wave of stunned whispers rippled through the room. Lila's jaw dropped. Kennedy didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He simply took control of the entire room with a single sentence. And everyone there knew it. This wasn't over. Not even close. The hearing room was still buzzing from the moment the senator's daughter, Lena Whitford, the outspoken 24-year-old daughter of Democratic Senator Alan Whitford, had taken her first swing at Senator John Kennedy. What began as a routine oversight session had turned into a stage she clearly believed belonged to her. She sat forward in her chair, expensive blazer sharp against the polished mahogany table, her voice dripping with the kind of confidence only inherited power could breed. "Senator Kennedy," she said, leaning into her mic with a smirk that was almost theatrical, "with all due respect, which honestly isn't much, you sound like someone who hasn't opened a policy book in 20 years. A few gasps fluttered around the room. Reporters immediately lifted their phones. Staffers froze mid-note. Kennedy didn't flinch. His face didn't even move. He simply watched her, steady as a lighthouse in a hurricane. A man who'd seen every kind of political performance and had never once been impressed by theatrics. Lena pushed harder, sensing cameras turning her way. "I mean, honestly," she continued, "my freshman year econ professor explained energy policy better than you just did. Maybe it's time to retire the folksy act." More gasps. A few stifled laughs from her side of the aisle. She straightened proudly, convinced she'd scored a clean hit. But Kennedy still didn't move. He crossed one leg over the other, hands folding calmly, as if he were listening to a weather report, not an attempted public takedown by someone who'd never worked a real job outside her father's shadow. He waited until the silence stretched, until every eye was on him, until Lena's confidence started to flicker just slightly under the weight of his composure. Then he finally leaned toward his microphone. "A mess. Whitford," he began, voice low, steady, and polite enough to be dangerous. "I've seen rodeos less noisy than what you just attempted." A ripple of startled laughter broke across the room. Lena blinked, thrown off, her posture tightening. Kennedy continued, tone still warm but precise enough to cut steel. "Now, I know you're eager to impress your daddy's donors. Truly, I admire the enthusiasm. But enthusiasm is not the same as understanding. And I'd advise you, real gently, to make sure you know which one you're bringing into a hearing." The chamber snapped into silence. Reporters' fingers flew. Staffers exchanged wide-eyed looks. Lena's smirk evaporated. Kennedy wasn't finished. But the room already knew the tide had turned. The moment Senator Kennedy finished his sentence, the room held its breath, but Elena Marston, the daughter of the Democratic senator, wasn't done. She leaned forward in her seat, dark hair swinging over her shoulder, a smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. She wanted a spectacle. She wanted a headline. And she was convinced she was about to embarrass John Neely Kennedy in front of the cameras. "Senator," she said, her tone dripping with arrogance, "it's honestly adorable that you think anyone still takes you seriously. You sound like a history book nobody reads anymore." Her words were styled like a dagger. Quick, sharp, meant to draw blood. A few staffers shifted uncomfortably. Reporters lifted their cameras in anticipation. Elena smelled opportunity. Kennedy didn't move. Not a blink. Not a twitch. He simply looked at her with that calm, steady expression he had perfected over decades, a look that said he had heard every insult imaginable and survived them all. And Elena, mistaking his silence for weakness, pressed harder. "You know what your problem is," she continued, raising her voice. "You speak like you're the smartest man in the room, but every time you open your mouth, you prove the opposite." A couple of interns gasped softly. One covered their mouth. Elena smiled, thinking she had landed the hit. Kennedy finally adjusted his glasses. Slowly. Deliberately. And that alone made the whole chamber lean forward. His pause wasn't hesitation. It was strategy. "Elena," he began gently, with that unmistakable Louisiana drawl, "I've been in public service longer than you've been alive. I've seen folks try to win arguments by throwing glitter instead of facts." The room shifted, an energy change sharp enough to feel. Elena's smirk flickered. Kennedy continued, voice low but powerful, "And every time someone starts swinging insults instead of reason, it usually means they ain't got much reason to swing in the first place." A few muffled chuckles rippled through the room. Cameras zoomed in. Elena's posture stiffened. Kennedy wasn't raising his voice. He didn't have to. His restraint was the blow. His calmness was the strike. And everyone watching could sense the balance of power beginning to tilt. And not in her favor. The room felt smaller the moment Caroline Pierce leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and flashed Kennedy the kind of smirk only someone born into political royalty could perfect. Several aides shifted uncomfortably. Even a few senators glanced toward the doorway as if expecting her father, Senator Pierce himself, to burst in and stop her. But Kennedy didn't flinch. He simply adjusted his glasses, folded his hands, and waited. Caroline mistook his patience for weakness. "So tell me, Senator," she said loudly, her tone dripping with entitlement, "is cluelessness a requirement for your job, or just your personal brand?" A few staffers sucked in a breath. Someone actually whispered, "Oh, she did not just say that." Kennedy didn't move. Didn't blink. Caroline rolled her eyes dramatically. "This committee deserves seriousness. Not, whatever this is." She waved her hand toward him like she was shooing away a servant. I grew up around real policymakers. Real leaders. People who know what they're doing. You're famous for folksy speeches and old jokes, not actual substance. She leaned forward. Honestly, Senator, people like you are the reason young leaders like me have to fix this country. Now the room tightened, silently, collectively, because everyone knew she'd stepped into dangerous territory. Insulting Kennedy was one thing. Declaring herself the savior of American governance in front of him? That was a different kind of reckless. Kennedy finally tilted his head, just slightly. His voice, when he spoke, was soft, dangerously soft. Miss Pierce, are you finished? Caroline smirked again. Not even close. Well, Kennedy replied, bless your heart for the enthusiasm. But let me give you a little advice, free of charge, since I can't imagine you've heard much outside your father's echo chamber. The committee leaned in. Caroline's smile froze, just barely. Kennedy continued, calm but cutting. You can graduate from every fancy school your daddy pays for. You can memorize every buzzword your consultants hand you. You can tweet every hour on the hour about how much smarter you think you are than the folks you serve. But none of that, he said, tapping the table once, gives you the right to talk down to people who actually do the work. Caroline's confident expression slipped. Kennedy wasn't raising his voice, he didn't have to. His words landed like weight on marble. And if you believe leadership is about belittling people instead of serving them, then darlin', you're not ready for this room. Not now. Not later. Maybe not ever. The silence afterward wasn't quiet. It was stunned. The room tightened the moment she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms with a smug theatricality that belonged more to a gossip show than a Senate forum. Senator Hale's daughter, Reagan Hale, wasn't just angry now. She was enjoying herself. Her lips curled into a slow, taunting smirk as she prepared her next strike, the kind meant to draw blood. So tell me, Senator Kennedy, she said, voice dripping with condescension, is this where you pretend to understand how the world works? Or do you save that for your folksy little sound bites? A few aides shifted in their seats. One reporter actually winced. Even seasoned staffers knew she'd crossed from political combat into cheap insult territory. But Reagan didn't notice, she mistook silence for dominance. Kennedy remained still, his posture unchanged, his expression unreadable. His calmness only made her bolder. You know what your problem is, she continued, leaning forward now, her earring swinging sharply with each syllable. You talk like you're some moral compass, but everyone sees you for what you are, outdated, irrelevant, and completely outmatched. A murmur rippled across the chamber. The arrogance was suffocating. But Kennedy didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He simply folded his hands, waited for her voice to fully fade, then spoke with a measured steadiness that made the room collectively inhale. Miss Hale, he said, slow and controlled, I've been insulted by experts. You're not even in the minor leagues. Her smirk faltered. The room reacted, quiet laughs at first, then louder ones from both sides of the aisle, the kind that said the tide had turned. Reagan stiffened, cheeks flushing, but Kennedy wasn't finished. You keep confusing volume with intelligence, he said. One day, someone's going to tell you the truth about yourself. I might as well do it now. You don't intimidate people, just exhaust them. A burst of applause broke out. Staffers tried, and failed, to hide their reactions. Reporters typed furiously. Reagan Hale had walked into this thinking she'd verbally overpower a man who'd spent decades mastering pressure, conflict, and strategy. Instead, she'd charged straight into a rhetorical buzzsaw. And Kennedy hadn't even raised his voice, the moment the young woman, daughter of a well-known Democratic senator, leaned back in her chair with that smug, satisfied grin, the room felt colder. She had just finished another round of jabs at Senator Kennedy, each one dripping with entitlement, each one delivered with the confidence of someone who had never been told no a single day in her life. Staffers exchanged uneasy glances. Even seasoned committee members shifted in their seats. Everyone sensed she wasn't just testing boundaries, she was detonating them. She flicked her hair over her shoulder and said, loud enough for every camera to hear, "Senator, some people are relics. And you? You're practically a museum exhibit." A few aides hidden behind laptops stifled laughter. She smirked, believing she had landed a devastating blow. Kennedy didn't flinch. Not a muscle. Not a twitch. He simply straightened the papers in front of him and looked up with an expression so calm it bordered on surgical. The kind of calm that meant someone had just made a very, very serious mistake. He let the silence hang, just long enough for her confidence to wobble. Then, in that unmistakable Louisiana drawl that carried through the chamber like a slow-rolling storm, he spoke. "Ma'am," he began, his voice even, polite, almost gentle, always the warning sign. "I've met a lot of folks who think volume makes up for accuracy. You might be the first who thinks attitude makes up for intelligence." The room froze. Her smile shattered instantly. Reporters jerked their heads up. A cameraman whispered, "Oh my God." Even members of her own party blinked in stunned silence. Kennedy wasn't done. He leaned forward slightly, eyes steady, tone still calm enough to rattle her far more than if he'd shouted. "You're welcome to disagree with me. That's the beauty of this country. But if your entire argument is built on insults," he shrugged lightly, "then I'm afraid you walked in here unarmed." A gasp rippled through the room like a physical wave. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. No comeback. No quip. No smirk. Her face flushed, her confidence evaporating under the weight of his precision-engineered reply. Kennedy settled back, folding his hands, the clear victor without raising his voice once. The committee room belonged to him now. The room had gone so quiet that even the shuffle of paper sounded like thunder. Staffers froze mid-note, reporters lifted their heads, and a few senators leaned forward as if gravity itself had shifted toward Senator Kennedy. Everyone could feel it, the moment before impact, the silence before the verbal strike they all knew was coming. Across the table, the senator's daughter, Emory Collins, was still smirking, arms crossed, chin lifted in triumph as if she'd just delivered a knockout blow. She thought she had him cornered. She thought her last line, dripping with condescension, had finally put the legendary John Neely Kennedy on defense. But Kennedy didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Instead, he slowly removed his glasses, letting them rest on the yellow legal pad in front of him. Then he looked at Emory with the kind of patience that only comes from a lifetime of dealing with entitled loudmouths who believed volume counted as intelligence. "Miss Collins," he began, his tone calm but razor-sharp, "I admire your confidence. Truly. But confidence without accuracy is just noise." A few muffled reactions rippled through the chamber. Emory's smile flickered. Kennedy leaned in slightly, not aggressive, but controlled, deliberate. "You've spent the last 10 minutes lecturing me on topics you clearly skimmed from a headline. That's not debate. That's karaoke politics. All performance, no substance." Cameras clicked. A staffer actually gasped. Emory's posture stiffened, her face flushing red as Kennedy continued. "You say I'm out of touch, because I don't parrot your talking points. But let me remind you, truth doesn't bend just because someone stamps their foot loud enough." The senator's daughter tried to interrupt, but Kennedy lifted a hand lightly, stopping her without even raising his voice. "Hold on there, young lady. You've had your turn. Now it's time for a little oxygen in the room." Laughter burst from the back rows, quiet, stifled, but unmistakable. Emory's composure cracked. Kennedy finished the moment with surgical precision. "I came here to discuss facts. You came here to feel clever. Only one of those things belongs in a Senate hearing. The entire chamber reacted, some with shock, others with barely contained applause, because everyone knew, Kennedy had just dropped the line that flipped the entire confrontation upside down. The chamber fell into a heavy silence as every pair of eyes shifted back to the young woman, Madison Hale, daughter of one of the most outspoken Democratic senators. Her confidence, which had glowed like a spotlight only minutes earlier, was now flickering, unstable. She tried to recover, straightening her shoulders, flicking her hair back, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "You think you're so clever, Senator," she snapped, but the sentence lacked the sharpness she intended. "People like you hide behind folksy charm because you have nothing real to say." Kennedy didn't move at first. He simply rested his elbows on the desk, fingers interlaced, studying her with the steady patience of a man who had spent decades watching inexperienced firebrands burn themselves out. When he finally spoke, it wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. His voice landed with the weight of a gavel. "Miss Hale, I've met hurricanes with better aim than your insults." A ripple of laughter broke through the room, quiet at first, then growing as aides, staffers, and even a few reporters failed to contain themselves. Madison's face reddened, but Kennedy wasn't finished. "You came in here thinking you could fix your daddy's arguments by shouting them louder," he continued. "But volume doesn't turn bad ideas into good ones. It just makes the crash easier to hear." Madison opened her mouth, but no words came out. Kennedy leaned forward slightly, delivering the final blow. "Let me give you some free advice. If you're going to throw stones, don't build your house out of talking points." This time, the room erupted. Laughter echoed off the paneled walls, even members of her own side shook their heads, some burying their faces in their hands. Madison froze, her composure shattered. She had walked in expecting to embarrass Kennedy, to score a viral moment at his expense. Instead, she had handed him the perfect setup, and he knocked it out of the park. Kennedy sat back, calm as ever, adjusting his glasses like nothing unusual had happened. But everyone else knew they had just watched a master at work. The room had already begun shifting before anyone realized it. Staffers exchanged uneasy glances, reporters leaned forward, and even a few senators paused mid-note. Everyone could sense it. Kennedy had taken control, and Senator Hale's daughter, Chloe, was fighting a battle she no longer understood she was losing. But Chloe, spoiled, confident, convinced of her own superiority, pressed on anyway. "So tell me, Senator," she said, crossing her arms with a smirk that was practically engineered for social media. "Do they teach you folksy one-liners in Louisiana as a substitute for real policy? Or is that just something you picked up on your front porch?" Her voice echoed with practiced arrogance, the kind used to shutting down college freshmen and political interns. She clearly assumed it would work on Kennedy too. It didn't. If anything, Kennedy looked amused. He leaned back slightly, tilting his head the way he often did before delivering the kind of line that made hearing rooms go silent. "Miss Chloe," he said calmly, "I've met possums with better manners, and even they know when to stop hissing." A few muffled laughs slipped out. Chloe stiffened. "No, please, go on," Kennedy continued gently, almost kindly. "Because the more you talk, the more you prove your daddy should have invested in character before private school." The room cracked. Half the senators tried to hide their reactions, others didn't bother. Papers shifted, someone choked on a sip of water, and even the stenographer's fingers stalled for a split second. Chloe's eyes widened, then narrowed. You can't talk to me like." "I just did," Kennedy said, still utterly unshaken. "And if you'd like to continue, I'll be happy to keep schooling you. Lord knows somebody has to." Silence punched the room flat. Chloe, for the first time all afternoon, had no comeback. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, nothing. She wasn't used to being outmatched, and she really wasn't used to being outmatched effortlessly. Kennedy straightened the papers in front of him, completely composed. "Now," he said, turning back to the committee, "if we're done auditioning for TikTok, some of us would like to get back to the business of governing." It was over. And everyone knew it. The moment the chairman gave the floor back to Senator Kennedy, the entire chamber felt the shift. People sat straighter. Even the cameras panned in a little closer, sensing the finish, sensing that Kennedy wasn't done yet. Not even close. He placed both hands on the table, slowly, deliberately, letting the silence build like pressure in a boiler. The senator didn't raise his voice. He didn't need theatrics. He spoke with the calm authority of a man who knew exactly how this was going to end. "Miss Dalton," he began, his tone steady, "you came in here hoping to make a moment. You wanted to be loud enough, rude enough, dramatic enough to get yourself on a few Twitter clips." Her jaw tensed, but Kennedy kept going. "But here's what you forgot." He leaned in just slightly, eyes locked on hers. "A person can shout over someone smarter than them, but it doesn't make them right. It just makes them louder." A few people in the back muttered under their breath, half amusement, half disbelief. "And you can throw all the insults you want," Kennedy continued, "but insults are the tools of someone who ran out of facts before they opened their mouth." Dalton tried to interject again, but Kennedy lifted a finger. Not rudely, not aggressively, but with such perfect timing that she froze mid-breath, the room holding back a laugh. "You called me outdated, outmatched, out of touch," he said. "But the only thing out of touch is someone who thinks volume is a substitute for substance." A ripple of applause spread from the audience seating, soft at first, then louder. Even a couple of staffers who tried to hide it couldn't keep straight faces. "And let me leave you with this," Kennedy said. His final line came out like the clean downward swing of a judge's gavel. "When your daddy's name is the only reason you got invited to the grown-ups table, maybe don't act shocked when the grown-ups answer back." The room erupted. Not chaos, just pure, stunned, "Did he just say that?" energy. People clapped. A few laughed. Cameras flashed non-stop. Dalton sat frozen, the spark gone from her challenge, replaced by the unmistakable realization that she had stepped into a fight she wasn't ready for. And Kennedy? He leaned back in his chair, calm as a quiet Sunday, as if teaching lessons like this was just part of the job. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you just witnessed wasn't simply a debate, and it wasn't just another heated exchange inside the walls of Congress. It was a reminder, a powerful one. That confidence without character collapses the moment it's challenged by truth." She came at Senator Kennedy with attitude, mockery, and a belief that her last name and connections could shield her from accountability. But Kennedy didn't meet arrogance with arrogance. He met it with clarity, composure, and the kind of sharp, undeniable logic that cuts straight through noise. He showed exactly why experience still matters. Why integrity still matters. Why facts still matter. And in the end, the room didn't applaud because he humiliated anyone. They applauded because he restored order, demanded honesty, and proved, once again, that strength doesn't come from volume. It comes from values. Senator Kennedy stood his ground. The truth stood with him. And the chamber saw the difference.